Jai Shri Ram. We often hear in Western media Hindutva being described as Hindu fundamentalism and Hindutvawadis being described as Hindu fundamentalists. And I think that there's two issues with this. One, obviously, they are portraying us that way because of the fact that they're just against everything that we stand for, and so they want to tar us with some kind of negative name. That's one issue. Second issue is there is either a lack of understanding or a purposeful misinterpretation of the facts, which is what I always think that it is, the purposeful misinterpretation that Hindutva as a political identity is not really an old thing. It's a modern idea that people have come up with to understand this modern set of issues that we have, where one, we have a very large minority of people of a different religion, which is relatively new to Hindu history, meaning only the last 1,300 years of a several thousand-year-old civilization. And two, we also have democratic politics where people have different political parties and stand for elections. And now, whenever I say something like that, people will always say, well, we had the Mahajanapadas and this was an ancient democracy, so on and so forth. But those people didn't have political parties with a written platform and vote banks and things like that. Yes, they had representation, but they didn't have anything similar to the modern democratic process. So I don't really think that is at all relevant to modern Indian democratic politics, because the issues and dynamics that they had at that time have nothing at all to do with today. Now, the other issue with this idea of Hindu fundamentalism is that I really don't think Hinduism can have a fundamentalism because it's not based on a book. All of your fundamentalist Christianity and Islam and Judaism and so on, all of it, it's at least in terms of their own thoughts about it, is about we're going back to the foundational text of our religion and practicing it the pure way that we had been doing it since the creator of the universe gave us these laws to follow, or whatever the case may be, according to their belief system. Right? Now, in Hinduism, of course, if you study Hinduism, you find that it's gone through an enormous amount of evolution over time, where different practices were changed, different practices were developed. Things that originated in one part of India spread throughout India, so on and so forth, and even localized deities gained some kind of context as being, oh, this is a local form of this is a local form of that, right? In at least in all over South India, you have all of these different goddesses called something Amma or something Devi they're basically localized deities to some particular place, and their worship goes back into time immemorial. But people generally regard them as being the localized form of some pan-Hindu Devi that anybody would recognize, right? Parvati or Durga or Kali or something like that. So because of the fact that you have that ability to kind of evolve and recontextualize and things of that nature, I think the idea of fundamentalism doesn't really make sense. Also, we have a great comfort with using certain religious themes that we would all, or themes or imagery that we would all recognize in a particular context, even though that specific context may be inauthentic. And I'll give you a couple examples. One, I have an image in my kitchen of a child Ram feeding a laddu to a child Hanuman, which, we've all seen an innumerable number of images of Ram and Hanuman together, and, Hanuman showing his bhakti, so on and so forth. But if you think about the Ramayana story, it's very important, the event where Ram in his journey meets Hanuman, and they're both grown adults at this time, or maybe teenagers or whatever the case may be, but they're not children. So a meeting between a child Ram and a child Hanuman even though you can find images of this online that people would have in their, mandapas at home or whatever the case may be, that's not depicting an event that actually happened in the Ramayana. Yet, no Hindu is going to look at that image and say, you can't have this. It's wrong to keep this in your home. It's wrong to worship this image because in the Valmiki Ramayana, which is, holy scripture, this kind of event is not depicted because we know that they met at a much later point in their life, right? So that's one example. Another example is Bharat Mata, right? We've all seen how like Asaduddin Owaisi and these types of people have pushed against the slogan of Bharat Mata Ki Jai, and you have Muslims saying it's idol worship and polytheism and shirk and whatnot. Now, if you look into what Bharat Mata is, we all understand that it's Durga, right? Because if you look at the poetry and all of that, it is Durga. But this is not a very old concept at all. From what I can understand, this concept was basically invented in the middle of the 19th century during the independence movement as a kind of way to connect people's bhakti to, Durga with this general idea of wanting to fight for the motherland and so on and so forth. I mean, you're not going to find Bharat Mata being described in Puranas or anything like that. It was a modern or 150-year-old or whatever kind of response to colonial British occupation. Yet no Hindu thinks, this is a sacrilege to Goddess Durga that we're reinterpreting her as this country and this is wrong and we shouldn't say Bharat Mata Ki Jai because there's no scriptural evidence of this deity or anything like that. Any Hindu would recognize that this is a totally normal, valid, spiritual kind of a conception of what our land is, and that we should give it respect and have, put the mala on the photo of Bharat Mata and all of those kinds of things, which again, you can't really envision Abrahamists doing something like this with their deities, right? It would be seen as sacrilegious, it would be seen as blasphemy because they do not have within their religion an ability to kind of expand these basic themes that they may have into other things like, for example, Bharat Mata. And it's also interesting to note that throughout the world, you see many of these different personifications of different countries that people give respect to, and many of them are pagan deities from before these people were converted to Christianity or to something else that they still consider, this is mother this or, whatever the case may be. And another example that I wanted to talk about is Santoshi Mata, which from what I understand is even newer than Bharat Mata, that this is a goddess that was basically started to gain popularity in the 1960s, that women in the Hindi belt were doing a vrat, like a 16 consecutive week vrat on a particular day or something like that, for her to gain some, some materialistic thing people want whenever they do a vrat. And it gained popularity in the 60s. Then in, I think, the mid 70s, there was a movie, Jai Santoshi Ma, which, like all of your other religious kinds of films that had come out that were depicting, the different stories associated with this deity and stuff like that. But instead of talking about, actual figures from the Ramayana or Mahabharata or the Puranas, they were talking about this Santoshi Ma figure that had only recently been starting to get this kind of popularity, right? And it's not again, from what I understand, it's not a deity that goes back to the Puranas or anything like that. But if you look at imagery of Santoshi Mata, very clearly it just looks like Durga and maybe some elements of Lakshmi and some other deities, like with how, the Vahana she has, what she holds in her hand and things of this nature. It kind of seems like Durga with some different elements, combining different Hindu goddesses together into this one. And she's also considered, I believe, the daughter of Ganapati and I think Siddhi, one of Ganapati's wives, Siddhi, if I remember correctly, or maybe the sister or something like that. I'm not sure. But there is, in both the imagery and the whole concept of a vrat, which is of course very old, and what she's offered in the vrat and the mythological kind of setting that she's placed in, all of these things are very recognizable to Hindus and would be readily accepted by people as it has been, even though there's not some kind of older, deeply religiously connected justification for any of this, right? So with these three examples, the example of the child Ram and Hanuman image, the example of Bharat Mata, and the example of Santoshi Ma, what I'm trying to put forward is the fact that a religion that has quote unquote fundamentalism within it would not be comfortable with any of these three things, because you are taking something that either does not have scriptural backing or kind of contradicts something that some text says. You're going beyond that and seeing, there are general themes, general ideas, imagery, stories, personalities that we all hold to and believe in and revere, that are being appealed to here. And this is basically the antithesis of fundamentalism. I mean, if you even think about how any of us as Hindus have been taught our religion, none of us we didn't attend Bal Vikas classes where someone read from, some text, and this is how we got our religious instruction, right? It's something that we all imbibed from the kind of background that we came from and from our parents, family, those of you who were actually raised in India, from the society at large. And so again, this kind of lack of the Abrahamic impulse to always try to cite a scriptural source for literally anything you believe in or anything you do, this also kind of shows us the fact that using this term Hindu fundamentalism really doesn't make any sense. Now, I do think that fundamentalism does make sense if you're part of a particular sampradaya and you strictly follow all of the things you're supposed to do in that sampradaya, and you believe in all of the doctrines that are taught by that sampradaya. In that sense, you could say you're a fundamentalist of that particular sampradaya, but not as a Hindu broadly. So that's all I've got for you guys today. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Jai Shri Ram.